recording on. Okay. Okay. So yesterday we learned all about Yovel, and we learned the big machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Shmuel Benoy Shadrechem Broika when Yovel starts. Does Yovel start automatically? Is it ushered in automatically with the evening of Rosh Hashana? Or does Yovel have to be brought in manually, has to be triggered manually by blowing the shofar on Yom Kippur? Now, it makes if you're an Eved that you're getting freed that year, it makes a big difference. Do you get to go home for Rosh Hashanah, or do you only get to go home on Yom Kippur? Because if the trigger is just the shofar on Yom Kippur, then the Eved stays there. But the truth of the matter is, Rabbi Shmuel ben Yosef said that even if Yovel starts Rosh Hashanah, you still can't go home till Yom Kippur anyway if you're an Eved, but you still don't have to work. You don't have to work during the Seres Metshuva Rosh Hashanah. You can party, you can wear begadim of Cheres, but you don't go home anyway until Yom Kippur. And that led to a different shaila of whether or not Tosis Yovel applies. You add to the Yovel the Gemara had a Havamina that according to the Shita of the Shmuel ben Yosef that Yovel starts after Rosh Hashanah, maybe you'll extend Yovel post Yovel till Yom Kippur of the next year, and the Gemara dismissed that because of the pasuk that says V'kidashtem Mishnasa Chamishim. And then we had the last halacha discussing whether or not the year of Yovel, which is the year 50, does it double up as year number 1 as well or not? And we paskin nowadays, and Tosis brings down that we paskin that it is year number 1, and that's how we're able to maintain the integrity of our Shemitah cycle, even though we don't know when Yovel is. So we are now on the 4th line of Daf Tesamid Aleph. And the Gemara had just introduced, we're going to go off on a little bit of a tangent, because the Gemara just introduced a new concept. The concept of Moisifin Mechail al Kodesh. We're Makabel Shabbos early, Makabel Yom Kippur early. So the Gemara says with the Moisifin Mechail al Kodesh Minalan. What is the Makar in the Torah that you add from Chayil to Kodesh? Zok to Gemara. This is what we do. It says Becharish Uvakach Tishbais. So let's take a look at what this pasuk is talking about, because at first glance it seems like it's talking about Shabbos, but the Gemara is going to say otherwise. So it says in the pasuk Sheish Yamim Tavoid, clearly we're speaking about Shabbos. On the 7th day, Tishbais, you should stop doing malacha. Becharish Uvakach Tishbais. But what's puzzling here is Charish and Katzir are not the only malachas that are prohibited on Shabbos. There's 49 malachas that are prohibited on Shabbos. So why does the pasuk discuss here dafke charish v'katzir? So the Gemara thinks obviously we're talking about a different type of Shabbos where only charish and katzir are prohibited, and that's the Shabbos of Shemitah. So it's because of these examples of malachas the Torah offered, the charish v'katzir, that is the reason why the Gemara Dashins this pasuk is referring to Shemitah. So let's see what it says over here. The time the charish v'katzir is the key vaymer. So you see the Gemara by default is automatically assuming that we're speaking about Shemitah. Where do you get that from? Zok Rashi, the Al Karchach, Avagav the Reish the Krab Shabbos Koi. Even though the pasuk seems to start off speaking about Shabbos, nevertheless, Seifa Shvius Koi. The end of the pasuk must be referring to Shemitah. Dia Shabbos, if the pasuk is referring to Shabbos, Charish v'Katzer Hu the Aser Shar Malachas Misharu. Are you going to say that only these malachas are usher and otherwise not? So it must be referring to Shvius. But I don't need the pasuk here to tell me that Chorish and Kotzer are usher and Shemitah. We know that. I'm sorry, that's a terrible mistake. On the year of Shemitah. So what is the pasuk referring to where it says Bechorish with a Kotzer Tishbais and Lechorish shall Erev Shvius Hanichnas L'Shvius? It must be answering Tois for Shemitah. You're not even allowed to make charisha before Shvius if it's going to impact the growth of fruits on Shvius. Zot Rashi, Charish al Erev Shvius, Shalayach Shadi Ilan Erev Shvius. You should not plow a field that has trees in it. So even though you're not looking to plant here, but plowing a field aerates it and benefits the fruits even on Shvius, even if you're not planting, even if there's trees there. Charish Shayoyel Shvius. So you're not allowed to do any work on the land, even pre-Shvius, if it's going to impact the Shvius. That's at the beginning. That's before Shvius comes in. And Uktir Shal Shvius Hayoyel Matzai Shvius. So if Rashi, Tvua Shvius Shlish Shvius, while Tvua grew, and it grew 1/3 on the Shemitah year. At the Noigba minig Shvius b'Shminis, you have to firzach with the minig of Shvius, meaning even though you only harvested that wheat after the Shemitah year in year 8 or in year 1, nevertheless, you still have to treat it like Paris and Shemitah. So you see a concept of Tosfos. You see Mosid Mechal HaKodesh because we're adding to the prohibition of working on agriculture on the year of Shemitah alone, and we're adding some before and some after. Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, you don't learn any type of Tosfos from this pasuk. You learn a completely different thing from this pasuk. And what you learn from this pasuk is that the only type of malachas on Shabbos that are asur are malachas that you do voluntarily. But if there's a mitzvah that mandates that you do one of these malachas, then those malachas will not be asur on Shabbos. And the Gemara is going to flush it out and give an example. B'Shmuel Leimer, ma charish rishus av ksir rishus. Just like there's never ever a place in the Torah where there's a chiyuv to make a charisha. So it's only voluntary that you make a charisha. That's what the Torah means to tell us. Such an avodah, such a malach is asur. So av ksir rishus. So too, the Isra Tzira is also only a Isra Tzira on Shabbos if it's not a mandatory Tzira. Yotza Tzira Omer, but there is one place in the Torah where it's mandatory to cut, even if it's Shabbos, because you have to cut on a specific day. And that's cutting the wheat for the Korban Omer. Shu mitzvah. And that's going to be Doicha Shabbos. So the reason why the Pasuk, even though it's speaking only about Shabbos, not about Shemitah, mentions Chorish and Katzir is because the Torah is trying to teach us something about Katzir. That the tzira that's mandated that you need to do on that specific day, on the second day of Pesach, you're allowed to do even though it's Shabbos. Let's see Rashi. The pasuk is only speaking about Shabbos. It's not speaking about Shemitah like the first Tana said. But Balalam teaching you ma charish ein la charish al mitzvah. Just like charisha, there's no such place anywhere in the Torah where charisha is mandated. Even if you need to plant in order to be able to have the Omer Shelechem, there's still no specific mitzvah to plow. If you already found the field that was plowed, you can plant it. You don't have to make a special charisha for the purposes of the Korban Omer. That's what's usher to you on Shabbos. So too, when the Torah prohibits tzir on Shabbos, it's only a tzir that doesn't involve the mitzvah. Let's say you have cut wheat. You shouldn't use that wheat. Mitzvah litzah, there's a special mitzvah to cut on the second day of Pesach wheat l'kovid the Korban Omer. So from here you see that ksiras ha'omer is doicha the Shabbos.
Why then isn't shofar blowing allowed on Shabbat?
You mean you're talking about Rosh Hashana that falls on the Shabbos?
Yeah.
That's a day, right. Of course it is allowed on Shabbos. The Rabbanan asked it because someone might carry it to learn.
So did they ask her the Katsira as well?
No, I guess they didn't. They weren't worried that somebody's going to carry wheat or carry his knife to figure out how to cut wheat. This kind of.
This was
how to reap the fruits of his labor. That he probably knows. He's like, there's a famous story. There's halacha that migoi. If you have a migoi, it's a raya and you're neman. In other words, if I said a shvachataina, but I had the option to say a starkataina, I'm believed that I'm not lying with my weaker taina, because if I was going to be a liar, I had a much better taina that I could have used. So there's a story where a woman had a migoi, and there was a shaila if she's believed with a migoi. And somewhere on taina, there's no way she has a migoi, because there's no way she would have ever thought of the superior taina. So the Rav answered, when it's a kim to geld, it made him the Moshe Feinstein. When it comes to money, she'll become a big Talmid Chacham. She'll have all the time that she needs. So Zok Gemara. Oh, good morning, Shlomi. Welcome for the bar mitzvah. I'm sorry that I didn't come up with a good bar mitzvah joke. I apologize. Good morning, David Lightman. Okay. How was Shabbos?
Beautiful, Baruch Hashem, beautiful.
We missed you here. Strike the Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel Musaf and Michal HaKodesh Minolei. I'm sorry, Chamsi?
Well, I thought I was muted. You have to tell them that we missed a lot of people here this week.
I hear we did. But for Shlomi, we missed Shlomi. Shlomi is my neighbor, no? We have Shmuel Masikin, Michal HaKodesh Minolei. How do we know Rabbi Shmuel, how did Rabbi Shmuel know this concept? He used this pasuk to tell us something else. So Gemara, he has other options. Nafkalei miditanya. It says regarding Yom Kippur, the Nisa misnafsha sheichem besisha. On Arab Yom Kippur, you have to make an inui nefesh. Yochel b'tisha. You might think you have to fast on the 9th day of Tishrei. Tamad loimer b'Arab. No, you only have to fast in the evening. If you only have to fast in the evening, Yochel mishatechshach. You might think evening means after it gets dark, when it's actually 10. Tamad loimer b'tisha. No, it says on the 9th, which is obviously before it became dark. So how is it possible that you could fast on the 9th if you're supposed to fast on the 10th? You start fasting a little bit earlier than Yom Kippur. It teaches you you see here that you're Moisef Mechoil al Kodesh. Now, in the earlier example we had with Shemitah, we showed Tois for Shemitah before the year of Shemitah, that you're not allowed to plow before, and Tois for Shemitah after your year of Shemitah, things that grew but were only harvested after the Shemitah. Here, we've only illustrated an example of Tois for Yom Kippur by starting to fast early. Where do you see that you have to extend the fast past the day of Yom Kippur? From one evening to the next evening, part of the evening post Yom Kippur is also included in the mitzvah. So there you see the Tosfos says Yom Kippur. Ainly Ela Yom Kippur, Shabbos Minayim. We see Yom Kippur, this concept of Tosfos. Where do you see this concept by Shabbos as well? Talmud Lomer Tishbesu. It says Me'erev ad Erev Tishbesu Shabbatchem. So the word Tishbesu, we learn Shabbos and Yom Tov Minayim Talmud Lomer Shabbatchem. Haketzad Kol Mokim Sheyesh Bo Shvus. Anytime there's an Isser to do Malacha, Moisifin Mechol al Kodesh, you add from Chol on to Kodesh. Beautiful. So this is our Makar. So there's a couple of things we have to discuss. First of all, we have a Murdiker of Akiva Eiger's Kasha in the Gilui Nashas. So I want to draw your attention to the Gilui Nashas. The Gilui Nashas says, Kol Mokim Sheyesh Bo Shvus. Kashali. Rabbi Akiva Eiger, I have a very, very big difficulty. Rabbi Akiva, the Loi Darishkin. Rabbi Akiva didn't use this drasha. Right? This is Rabbi Shmuel talking. Rabbi Akiva learned it all from Shemitah. Rabbi Akiva learned it all from the fact that you stop plowing already before Shemitah and you don't cut even things that grew on Shemitah afterwards. So according to Rabbi Akiva, who didn't have any pasuk referencing Yom Kippur or Shabbos or Yom Tov, according to Rabbi Akiva, the Alf Mishvius, Hamizeh loy matina l'meilaf, raked in Tosfos, linyan Isser Malacha. I understand you could stretch it and say that the same way there's an Isser Malacha of agricultural Malacha before after Shvius, so maybe for Shabbos and Yom Kippur or Yom Tov you'll have an Isser Malacha. But where do you see Inui? How in the world do you see anything about a Tosfos Inui from the fact that on the Shemitah year you start early and end late? Minole, to ein lilmod Inui mimalacha v'memetzinu. How could you compare Inui to Malacha? The Malacha, the Noig b'Shabbosos v'Yom Tovim. Malacha is much more, the issue of Malacha is much more proliferated. It applies to many days. Therefore, we would say it has Tosfos. How do you know Inui? So Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva, we don't have a good raya. We don't have a good raya. There has to be Inui. Zok Rabbi Akiva, it gets worse. It's even more schwer. Afidul in Malacha. How do you even know Malacha from Shvius? Habishvius ain't aser b'Tosfos midayraisa. Rak harisho ktsira. All of the Yisurim that are extended by Shemitah midaraisa are only charisha before, because it directly impacts the growth of the fruit on Shemitah, and ktsira because these are things that grew significantly on the Shemitah year. But planting before the Shemitah year would not be usher. How would you know if the whole Makar, according to Rabbi Akiva, is Shemitah, and by Shemitah, the only malachas that are Aser are Charisha and Tzira? So how do you learn all the 49 malachas should be Aser by Yom Kippur, by Shabbos? So Rabbi Akiva Eiger has very schwer, according to Rabbi Akiva's approach, how we would know the full gamut of the Yisurim of Tosfos Shabbos, Tosfos Yom Tov, Tosfos Yom Kippur. Kavaltic. So let's see the Gemara Vayter. Look at the Gemara Vayter. So there's an interesting Chasam Sofer. What does this mean, Tosfos Shabbos? Does that mean you just makabel the kedusha of Shabbos? Why is it relevant? Because what happens if Shabbos and Yom Kippur fall out on the same day? So we can't make a Suda on Shabbos because it's Yom Kippur, you have to fast. But if I can be makabel the kedusha of Shabbos early, so then let me be makabel the kedusha of Shabbos early, let me make early Shabbos, have a Geshmak Shabbos Suda, and then go to Yom Kippur, and you solve the problem. Okay, in the time between Plag and Shkia, you could have a Suda Shabbos. So therefore, some sort of explanation from this, you see that Tosfos Shabbos isn't just accepting the kedusha of Shabbos; it's actually accepting the kedusha of the night earlier. And therefore, if you would do that, automatically you're also accepting upon yourself the kedusha of Yom Kippur, and therefore you can't have this eitzah. To split the day, yeah.
Because I'll tell you why I say that. Because what happens on Sphere? Let's say you.
Makabel Shabbos early, could you tell Sphere?
No. Not that. You got the night before. Right?
And you Makabel Shabbos early, could you still do the night before because it's still light? I don't know. It's a good order. I don't know. So it's not going for Rabbi Kiva. What? Uh-huh. Going for Rabbi Kiva. He's not using it to tell you Tosfos Yom Kippur. So what does Rabbi Kiva use this pasuk for? So Chiyah Barav Midipti shared with us a beautiful limit from this pasuk. The Tanya Chiyah Barav Midipti. It says in the pasuk, "V'nisem esnafshosechem b'sisha." Fregt the brisa. The Chiba Tishim Misanin. Do we fast on the 9th day of Tishrei? We actually fast on the 10th day of Tishrei, which is Yom Kippur. One who eats and drinks on Erev Yom Kippur, Mala Olav Akosov, the Torah considers it Ki'ilu Isana Teshiva Asiri. It's as if he fasted 2 days. Let's see what Rashi says about this. You should fast on the 9th day. You should pain yourself on the 9th day. Achilas Tisha Anikari. The Torah is considering eating on the 9th day of Tishrei and Inui. Therefore, since the achila is an inui, then called the mavish b'achila ushtiya tzayada. If you're eating more and drinking more, so you're doing more inui, it's even better. Since it says be'erev, since it says be'erev, Yom Tish be'erev, clearly we're not makbid on fasting on the 9th day. So the inui that we're referring to on the 9th day is achila ushtiya today kari. So you don't have to actually fast. You have to eat Erev Yom Kippur, and that is the inui. So there's a whole bunch of Torah on how this works. So the Belzer Rebbe actually said that it's much, much more difficult to eat L'Shem Shemayim than it is to fast L'Shem Shemayim. When you fast, I'm refraining from eating L'Shem Shemayim. But when you're having a steak and a beer, it's very difficult to channel that in Gans L'Shem Shemayim. So that's a much greater Mesiras Nefesh, it's a much greater inui, and therefore it's a big Inyan. That's why the Torah wants us to do this on the Erev Yom Kippur. Another pshat is, someone said over, I forgot to relevant spoken out from, is that when we're fasting, we're saying Ki'ilu, we say it in Lazaka, that our fat and our blood that was Nesmait, because we didn't eat for a day, that should be like our carbon that we're bringing. So what type of fat and blood is the most holy fat and blood to eat? Is the fat and blood from the party, the barbecue you had in the summer in your bathing suit, guzzling beer, watching a football game? Or is it the eating L'Shem Shemayim of Erev Yom Kippur? Is that fat and blood what you want to use as your carbon? So therefore, there's a special Inyan to create yourself some fat on Erev Yom Kippur, so that's the fat that you should offer up on Yom Kippur as your carbon. I'm waiting for Akiva to jump in and say, "What are you talking about? Is that barbecue when you're making tibuk chaverim? That's the real carbon." And what? I hear. There's another interesting aura, and that is, are women mechuyev in eating? So if one of the reasons why it's inui is because by eating on Erev Yom Kippur, you'll be able to fast. It's a preparation for the fast. So if that's the reason, what if a woman for some reason is not able to fast on Yom Kippur? She's a Yoledes. So does she have a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur or not? So depending on what the reason will be, you will say she might have a mitzvah or she might not have a mitzvah. If it's only to help her fast, then it could be there is no chiyuv for it. But if it's because There's another story that I missed out. Another story is that it is the Suda of Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, you can't have a Suda, but you really shouldn't have a Suda Shampoo. So therefore, you have the Suda before. And that's why there's a mitzvah to eat. And another nafkamina that it chaps is, are you mechuyev to wash on the Erev Yom Kippur? If it's out the Suda Shampoo, surely you have to wash. But if it's just that you should be able to fast the next day, then maybe you don't have to wash. And the last item is that there are those who learn that fasting after a day of eating is sometimes more difficult than fasting not after they're feasting, and that's why it adds to the eating. There's another shaila, it's not directly relevant, but when it comes to neiros. Normally, when multiple women are in a home for Shabbos, they all light candles in the same room, in the dining room. Why can I make, what is the bracha about Lahatak Nishal Shabbos? It's because it's making the room light. It's adding to the Einik Shabbos. And if you're sitting around the table eating, the more candles that are there, the more light there is, the more beautiful the suda is. But on Yom Kippur, where no one's going to be sitting around the table eating, what happens once one woman lights? There's no need to have Tosfos Eira in that room because we're not sitting and congregating or eating in that room. So it's Bratan Allah Lamaisa. I believe Rabbi Moshe said that the best thing to do is if multiple women are sharing a home, they're staying in a home together, they shouldn't all light in the same room. They should light in different rooms because there's no mila of Tosfos Eira if no one's going to be sitting and eating in that room.
Yosy Zalman.
Yes.
I just want to interrupt. There was a fellow that didn't want to accept money from his son because his son became a Mechal Shabbos. So he went to the Rav, and the Rav said, I don't understand. He's a Mechal Shabbos, but the one mitzvah that he wants to give, that he wants to do, by giving you money, he wants to be mechabed his father. That one mitzvah that he does want to keep, you want to take away that mitzvah as well? I don't understand the logic why someone would say that the women who are nursing or who are expecting, because they can't fast on Yom Kippur, so we want to take away another mitzvah that they can't.
If the whole mitzvah is only to prepare for the fast, then it doesn't make sense. If the only reason why she's supposed to eat is to prepare for the fast, it's not taking it away. She doesn't have a fast to prepare for.
Right. So she doesn't have a mitzvah. So I don't want to learn like that because I don't want to take away the mitzvah from her.
I hear it. So you got to learn it's a special mitzvah of Erev Yom Kippur to eat so that she should be able to have the mitzvah.
I'll tell you what, you want really.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Just because of that logic.
I hear. Okay, Gavaldik.
Right.
Okay, let's see the Halakha Gemara about you. Tanu Rabban. Yovel. So I did want to chazer over the psukim because there's 3 psukim in a row, and we have to get an idea of the order of the psukim because it'll help us understand what's happening over here. So let me see if I can find the psukim we had them yesterday, I believe on Chesam and Aleph. So the psukim are as follows. Is it over here or is it over here? Where are those psukim up by Yovel? Well, maybe it's on Zayin and Aleph. Just want to get a listing of the 3 psukim. Not over here. There's 3 psukim that in a row that are discussing the mitzvah of Yovel. Just a little easier to understand it. Oh, here it is. It says over here as follows: "V'kidashtem." No, it's over here. "V'safayt lecha sheva shabbos hashanim sheva shanim sheva panim v'yilecha yimei sheva shabbos hashanim teshav aram shana v'avartu sheva tu b'chodesh shvi b'es lechosh b'nepurim taviu sheva b'chalartchem." Then the next pasuk it says, "V'kidashtem eshnas chamishim shana u'karasam dror b'oris l'chol yishvel Yovel he lachem v'shavtem misha lachuzasa v'shal mishpachte teshuvu." So we learned from the V'kidashtem shnas chamishim shana that year 50 is not year 1. Rabbi Yehuda told year 50 is year 1. And then Yovel he, it repeats it again. Yovel he, it's very repetitive. Shnas chamishim shana tia lachem le'sizro le'siksura sufisecha esufichel le'sivtus nisirel. So the Gemara now is focusing on this 3rd Yovel he. Why is the pasuk telling us this 3rd Yovel? Tanu Rabban Yovel he. Av api shaloi shamtu, av api shaloi taku. Zok Rashi, very important. Yovel itiyachem. It's your Yovel. La ilminate, the pasuk right before, like we read inside a moment ago. Ksiva avarter shofar v'kidashtem eshnas hachamishim shana u'kurasam dero. The pasuk at this point has already shared with us many of the features of Yovel. You blow the shofar and you free the avodim. And then the pasuk repeats itself. That's completely extra pasuk for a drasha. We've already went through all of the rules of Yovel. And this is how you should darshan that extra pasuk. The Yovel is schal, regardless of whether or not you took all the necessary steps to usher in the Yovel. Even if you didn't do some of the things that were required to usher in the Yovel, such as Havar Shofar, or Veloshav El Achuza, the Hainu Shmidas Karkoyos, Shokanu Zebizeh. Even if they didn't blow the shofar, and even if people did not return to fields, nevertheless, Yovel still chal. Legabi, what halachas is Yovel relevant? If it's not to return Karkoyos, the Chsiva Bazar Hakra, Veshtat Mishal Chazai, Aval Pi Kein Shema Yovel. Olav, even though you didn't do the things that you're supposed to do, like blow the shofar and return to Karkoyos, it's still Yovel. Liyos Aser Bezriya Upetzira Kedechsev Loisazur Loisaktur. So the third pasuk of Yovel, that's where it speaks about the Iser Zriya and Ketzira. So the pasuk is telling us that even though you didn't do your job on the rest of the things, you're still also to plant on that year. Aval Bishalei Shamtu, even though you didn't give back the Karkayis, Aval Bishalei Taku, even though Bezdin didn't blow the shofar on Yom Kippur of Yovel, nevertheless you're still not allowed to work in the fields. Yachal Aval Bishalei Shalom. You might think that Yovel is chal, even though they didn't release the avodim. We are makbid on something. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you don't free avodim, will not trigger the full Yisurim of Yovel, and you'd be allowed to plant. The Yisurim to plant and to do avoid in the field, although they're not relevant to Shmitas Karkoyos or the Tekiah, but they are hinged upon people freeing their slaves. Rashi Yovel, only if you did these things, he Yovel, Vimlav, any Yovel. The Kamei Mefarish, Yovel, my chazan to tell the previous story, the Gemara is going to ask, why in the world should the Kedusha of Yovel be dependent on freeing the slaves? But I'll call upon them, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yosy Omer, a little bit differently. Yoveli, Alpha Bishlei Shamtu, Alpha Bishlei Shalchu. What's not Ma'akiv is Shmitas Karkoyos and freeing avodim. But Yochel Alpha Bishlei Taku, you might think if Bezdin didn't blow the shofar, Yovel will still be chal, and the Isurim of agriculture will still be present. Talmud Loimer he. So both of these opinions have a riboy and a miyut, and the question is their selection as to what to make mandatory. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, what's ma'akiv is sending away the avodim, and according to Rabbi Yosy, what's ma'akiv is the bezdin blowing the shofar. Correct Gemara. Since we have one pasuk that says many things are not required to trigger the Yovel, and we have another pasuk that says something is required to trigger the Yovel, so Rabbi Yossi is asking on himself. So why did I pick my selection? Why did I say Yovel li Alpha Bishlei Shalchu ben Yovel Elam Kein Taku? Why do I say it hinges on the blowing shofar and not on the sending away the avodim, like my colleague Rabbi Yehuda said? The answer is it is technically possible that there are no avodim this year. So if the Torah would hinge the chalois of Yovel and people freeing their slaves, well, what if that year there were no slaves? So there wouldn't be Yovel. But the shofar. But it's impossible that there should never be a single shofar found in the world. There for sure would be a shofar. So it's logical to say that the Torah hinged Yovel in something that for sure is possible, not in something that maybe won't come to fruition. So Rashi, there could be a time where there are no avodim. But the after shaloye shofar matzaboilim, it's impossible that in the entire world you won't be able to find a shofar. It makes sense that the Torah said that it hinges upon something that's easy to find. Another pshat in why Rabbi Yossi decided to say it hinges on the Tkiyah Shofar, not on the Avodim. Zu Masur LeBezin. This is given over to Bezin to do. To free Avodim, each individual has to free their Avodim. It's very hard to have a central control over that. But something that's given over to Bezin, there's a central control. Rashi says, to appoint somebody to blow the shofar. But that's the responsibility of individual slave owners. And are you suggesting that if someone refuses to free a slave, it's not logical that it should depend on that? Why did Rabbi Yossi need two reasons as to why he prefers to say it's totally in Tkiyah Shofar? If you're going to say, come on, what is the likelihood that there's no Eved Ivri in the entire world? It's so unlikely. So that's not good enough of a reason to say that Yovel should not hinge on Shliuch Avodim. So that's why he had a second shot that Zu Mesur Lebezdin, Zu Ein Mesur Lebezdin. So Dr. Gemara, Bishlam Rabbi Yosy Kiddukamar time. Rabbi Yosy was very transparent and he explained very thoroughly why he wants to hinge Yovel in the Kir Shofar and not in the Shaluch Avodim. El Rabbi Yehuda, who hinges it in the Shaluch Avodim and not in the Kir Shofar, my timer. What is his svara for that? Why does he feel that the Yovel should be hinged to freeing Avodim? So Gemara Amakra, Ukrasam Duror Ba'aretz. It says in the pasuk Ukrasam Duror Ba'aretz, which means freeing the slaves. And right after that, Rashi says, it says Yovel He. So let's look at the order of the psukim, because once again, it becomes very, very relevant. So it says again, Vavarta, Shofar, Trua, L'chodesh Hashvi, Bezel L'chodesh B'yom Kippurim, Tarvir Shofar B'chalartchem. So the first pasuk speaks about the Kiyah Shofar. The next pasuk speaks about the Chidashtem Mishnas Chamishim Shana, Ukrasam Dror Ba'aretz, L'chol Yeshvel. So the second pasuk speaks about freeing Avodim. And it says again, Yovel He Tilachem, B'shavtem Isha Lachuzasai, B'isha Mishpachtet Teshuva. So the first pasuk speaks about Kiyah Shofar, the second pasuk speaks about freeing the Avodim. And then we have the Yovel He. Yovel He, it's Yovel no matter what, but only if you had specific things. So the pasuk that we're darshaning, which is inclusive that Yovel happens no matter what, but it does hinge on one thing, is this third pasuk. So let's look at the relationship of this limud to the earlier psukim. Right before it, it discusses freeing Avodim. Two psukim before it is where it's discussing Tekiyah Shofar. So Zok to Gemara. What is Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? Very, very simple. Because Savar, he holds a mikra nidras lefanov v'lo lefnei. The he, which is telling us that something is ma'akev for Yovel to be chal, we can say it applies to a concept discussed in the pasuk immediately prior, which was freeing the Avodim. But v'lo lefnei, we're not going to say it's referring to a subject discussed two psukim ago. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda feels that it should be totally in freeing the Avodim. So that's the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosy. What is ma'akev for Yovel to be chal, and legabe what is Yovel chal? Legabe the iser to plant and to make tira and to do other agricultural activities. However, the chula alma duror loshen cheres. Everybody does hold the krasam duror means that you're freeing these slaves. Where does it come from that this word duror is a loshen cheres? My mashma. The Tanya we learned ein duror ela loshen cheres. Duror is only a loshen cheres. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, ma loshen duror. Where does the word duror come from? Kimedayer beidaira, like somebody who has the ability to live wherever he wants, like Rashi says, Mishu b'shusay, loger b'chol malon sheyirtza. He can be in any hotel. So let's say there's certain hotels that are only open to Amex Platinum. What's the highest level? Black. What's the highest level of American Express? Let's say American Express Platinum, Gold, Vice, whatever it is. He has that card, so he can get into any hotel with an upgrade. So someone who has such freedoms, that's someone who could do business everywhere. And therefore, he could move scholar around from every city because he can get anywhere. Obviously, they didn't have Amazon, internet in those days, where from the click of your computer in your parents' basement, you could sell anything you want anywhere in the world. In those days, you actually had to be there to be able to do the sale. So you see, a lashon dai is a lashon of freedom. Yeah. He was a medar. His wings were spread.
Like went back to Avram after they said the rest of it,
he had branch offices everywhere. Yeah. So Amr Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amr Bechim. Zu diver Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosy. We've just discussed the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yehuda holds it's freeing the Avodim. Rabbi Yosy holds it's blowing the shofar. But the Chacham holds shloshton ma'akvos boy. They all three things have to happen. Say you have to blow the shofar. Say you have to free the Avodim. Say you have to give back the karkois, and only then will it trigger the isurim of the agriculture. Why is that? The pasuk of Yovel He applies to what it says immediately before it, which is Shiluch Avodim. It applies to two psukim before it, which is talking about blowing shofar, and it's speaking about the pasuk after it that's speaking about Shemitah's karkois. Vaksiv, it says Yovel. Dr. Gemara, and Yovel means it's inclusive, it's Yovel, even though certain triggers were not met. So Gemara, Hahu, Tafilu b'chutz la'aretz. That's telling you that even in chutz la'aretz, you have the chiyuvim of Shemitah. Fact Gemara, Vaksiv ba'aretz, it says that it's only ba'aretz, it's only Eretz Yisrael. So Gemara, Hahu b'zman shenoyig drar ba'aretz, noyig b'chutz la'aretz. When people give back the land in Eretz Yisrael, then they have to give back the land in chutz la'aretz. But when the halachas of Yovel are not being done in Eretz Yisrael, then they're not noig in chutz la'aretz, which seems to indicate that when Mashiach comes and we have the proper Yovelis, they're going to apply the chutz la'aretz as well. Okay, let's see the Gemara Vayta. Tosha actually speaks out that Rabbi Yosy was also moida that applies to chutz la'aretz, even though he doesn't have this limud. So Tosha says he must learn it from a different place. Let's see the Heilige Gemara Vayta. Ula Natiyah. So we said that Rosh Hashana, which is Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, is a Rosh Hashana Natiyah for plants. Minalan, how do you know that? So what a Natiyah is, if you take a sapling and you plant it, that's called a Natiyah. So it's Zriya would be planting a seed, Natiyah is planting a sapling. Minalan, how do you know this Allah? The Chesivit says, Shalosh Shonim Arelim. So we learned in Rashi and the Mishnah what's the relevance of Rosh Hashanah for Natiyah? Because the first 3 years that your fruit grows, or the first 3 years fruit that grow are asudit, are called orla. When does the first year end? The first year ends when the first Rosh Hashanah arrives. So if you planted something in Elul, let's stay away from Elul for now. Let's say in Av, you planted something in Av a month and a half before Rosh Hashanah. Once Rosh Hashanah arrives, year 1 is over, and you started year 2. So you get to get credit for a whole year with only a part of a year. Uchsiv, it says Shalosh Shonim Arelim. Uchsiv ubishana haravias, on the 4th year is when you have Neter Avai. We're going to be analyzing these psukim, so let's read them inside. It's Beis and Gimel. It says V'chisavoyu el haaretz. You come into the land, Unatatem kol machal, and you're going to plant fruit trees. Va'araltem arlosayas period. You have to treat their pears as arla. Shalosh Shonim yilachem. 3 years. Yilachem arelim lo yayachal. You may not eat the pears for the first 3 years. Uva Shana Haravias. So we're going to focus not right now, but later on. Uva Shana Haravias, and on the 4th year seems to be connecting this pasuk to the pasuk of Arla. Uva Shana Haravias. Yia kol period kodesh hilulam Hashem. The pears you're allowed to eat them, but they're like Meiser Sheni, where you have to be paid to them and eat them in Yerushalayim, or you have to eat them in Yerushalayim, or pay to them and take the money to Yerushalayim. Okay. And then it says the pasuk later, which we're not quoted here, we'll see later. It says Uva Chamishes on the 5th year, which also connects it to the Shana Revius. So let's see how the Gemara does. It says Uva Shana Revius, V'yalav Shana Shana Mitishra, and we learn the word Shana Revius from the word Shana that it says regarding Chodesh Tishrei. Yechsiv Mereishis Hashana, which is a similar limit to what we have yesterday. Just like Mereishis Hashana is referring to Chodesh Tishrei, so too when it says Shana Shana Marelim, it's referring to Chodesh Tishrei. In fact, Gemara Ligmar Shana Shana Midinsan. Why don't you learn the word Shana from a pasuk where it says Shana regarding the Chodesh Nisan, which is the same question we had yesterday. We have the same answer. Don in Shana she'eni machadashim, mishana she'eni machadashim. Then don in Shana she'eni machadashim, mishana she'eshi machadashim. When you're looking to compare the word Shana in the Parsha of Arla, we're going to look for a similar pasuk where it only has the word Shana and not Chadash. And therefore, rather than go to Nisan, which has Chodshei Hashana and has Shanim together with Chadashim, we'd rather compare it to Rosh Hashanah of Chodesh Tishrei, where it only says Shana without Chadash. Tana Rabbanan, Echad Hanaiteya. There's an Isser to plant, or when we talk about Arla, when you're taking a sapling and you're planting it by itself in the ground. Echad HaMavrich. There's another thing that people do, is they have an existing tree with a soft branch that's coming out the side. They take that soft branch, they bend it down and put it into the ground, and then they bend it back up to grow up. And the intent is that that area, that elbow that they put under the ground will start sprouting roots, and then they'll have a fully independent second tree. That's the definition of mavrik. And then markiv is if you take a branch of one tree, you bend it over and you cut a hole in the neighboring tree and you put it into the neighboring tree so they should bond together, and that's called grafting. and that helps things grow better. So if you did all these things, Erev Shvius Shloishim Yoim Lefnei Rosh Hashanah, if you did this 30 days before Rosh Hashanah on the year before Shemitah, also Rosh Hashanah. First of all, when it comes to the question of Arla, since it's there 30 days before, it counts as a year. So that means Shemitah will be year 2 for the purposes of Arla. The year after Shemitah will be year 3. And then 2 years after Shemitah, you already can use the payers. Umuter l'kaimim b'shviyas. It's also relevant for Shemitah. We don't look at it like you planted on the Shemitah year. We looked at it like you planted before the Shemitah year. So there's 2 different halachas that are coming into play here. A is what year it's being identified as with the year of Arla. And B is it considered something prohibited that you did l'gabe Shemitah? Pachas mishloshim yoyim lefnei Rosh Hashanah. But if you did this within 30 days of Rosh Hashanah, then loy also loy shana, then the year doesn't count for Arla, and that means Shemitah will be year 1 for Arla. And ba'asher l'kaimim b'shviyas, you wouldn't be allowed to use them on Shviyas because it's like you planted it. You weren't allowed to plant on Shviyas. Let's see, Rashi. Pachas mishloshim yoyim loy also loy shana at Tishrei Haba. The first year anniversary for the purposes of counting the years of Arla will be next Tishrei. Im Eina Erev Shviyas. If it's not Erev Shviyas, Im Erev Shviyasi, but if it's Erev Shviyas, then you have a bigger problem. Then Asher L'Kaimoi, then you actually have to pull this tree out because you ended up planting it Be'Isr. Since we say Shviyas starts already a month before, and you planted this plant during that period of time, you have to rip out this tree. Now, what if you did plant it early enough? What if you did plant it more than 30 days before? So you're allowed to leave it, and it counts as year 1. Nevertheless, don't think the moment Rosh Hashanah, don't think the moment Rosh Hashanah comes in year 4, bam, you're allowed to use those payers. You can't at Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year use those payers. You have to wait for Tu B'Shvat. No matter what it's for, if it's for Arla, if you're counting the 3rd year or the 4th year or the 5th year, you count from Tu B'Shvat. Why do you count from Tu B'Shvat? Didn't we just say that Tishrei, Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, is Rosh Hashanah L'Tiyos? So Rashi explains beautifully. We had a metamorphosis over here. Also Loishana, even though we say that year, the 1st year counts because he was there, he planted this tree already 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. In B'chantu ba'peiros l'achar Rosh Hashanah. Shoshana Rabias Miyad, it's right after Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year. Peiros blossomed. Adarim Asurim Hinalamas Mishum Marla. We still consider them Marla. You might ask, what do you mean? It's already past Rosh Hashanah. It's already in the 4th year. So Rashi, Shafal Pisha Rosh Hashanah Tishrei Natia. Even though when you're planting, Rosh Hashanah is Tishrei. Tu B'Shvat Rosh Hashanah Lilam. 3 years later, you're not planting anymore. Now it's almost a mature tree. At that point, the date of its Rosh Hashanah has changed from Rosh Chodesh Tishrei to Tu B'Shvat. The Zukfai Nasa Silan. In the 3 years that this was growing, it matured into a tree. So therefore, in the 4th year, when we hit the 4th Rosh Hashanah, it's not yet in its 4th year, because at that point, this is a tree, and it has to wait till Tu B'Shvat of the 4th year. So therefore, only fruits that blossom after Tu B'Shvat of the 4th year will be considered Rabai. But after that, yes?
Sorry, so what about year 5? So year
Same
4,
thing.
you change it, so Tu B'Shvat.
Year 5, Tu B'Shvat, if something blossomed before Tu B'Shvat on year 5, it's still Neter Rabai. And if it blossomed after Tu B'Shvat on year 5, it's free and clear.
So why doesn't it change to Tu B'Shvat in year 2?
It might, but it doesn't matter. It's not relevant. You can't eat it anyway. It's only relevant to us when you're going into the 4th year. So at what point it transitions from the Tia to Ilan, I don't know exactly where that point is. But the question is only relevant when you're transitioning into year 4, because that's when it becomes mutter to eat. And by year 4, for sure, we consider it a tree.
Well, Bikurim, right? If it's fruit tree.
You don't bring Bikurim from Arla. Not from Arla.
Oh, you're right. So you only bring Bikurim after year 4.
Correct. So, and at that point, it's for sure a tree, and it's all dependent on Tu B'Shvat.
Okay.
So Rashi, but after that period of time, im yachnu tu ba'peiros, then Rabbi Alein. If on the 4th year after Tu B'Shvat we had a peiros blossom, then it is not Rabbi. Lechol b'Yerushalayim, to be able to eat it in Yerushalayim. Ubetu l'shon haba, and on the 5th year of Tu B'Shvat, Yotzu midei Revai, Perish hachanuten ba mikam velech. They're free and clear, and those you bring bikurim on, like Akiva mentioned. Lakach ha'ilula lamid shalafnei Rosh Hashanah. So that's how the 30 days before Rosh Hashanah help. Shemimayer hetera mitesvav b'Shvat b'ad Rosh Hashanah. What you're benefiting is you're benefiting only the period of post Tu B'Shvat in the 4th year, but at least you get that. Because if you didn't, if the 30 days before this first Rosh Hashanah where you planted it wouldn't have given you that extra year, then you would have had to wait to Tu B'Shvat of the next year. So that's why you have a benefit of planting it 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. And let's stop over here. What is that?
Diagram here, right?
Das ist Amen.
Yes.